Welcome to Velvet Crime. Tonight we follow Sherlock Holmes into the ghost in the Florence Crypt, a case born from a letter written in bone dust and a whisper that would not die. Beneath the tombs of Florence, faith and science collided, and belief itself became deadly. Before we begin, remember, some truths echo longer than life. Tell me, have you ever trusted the silence after a sound? Subscribe and let the mystery begin. It began with a hollow tapping against the window pane, neither timid nor bold, but urgent, like a hand striving to restrain its own fear. Holmes, who had been bent over a scattering of mineral samples upon the table, did not raise his head. "Open it, Watson," he murmured. The rhythm tells us a gentleman accustomed to control, but now on the edge of surrender. The sound motif, tap, pause, tap, tap, seemed to echo inside the small Baker Street room as I lifted the sash and admitted a swirl of fog along with our nocturnal visitor. The man stepped in swiftly, hat pressed to his chest. His face, thin and olive, bore the exhaustion of sleepless travel. "Mr. Holmes, forgive the hour," he began. "My name is Signor Rossi, assistant curator to the Medici collection in Florence." Holmes gestured toward the chair by the hearth without preamble. "Then the hour is appropriate to your distress, sir. Sit. The night rewards confession." I moved to stoke the fire. The ember crackle harmonized with the persistent tapping still sounding faintly from the glass, as though the city itself repeated the man's message. "I bring a letter," Rossi continued, producing an envelope sealed with violet wax. It arrived at the Uffizi 3 weeks ago, unsigned. Within it, only this phrase in Latin, "Vox mortui, sub terra loquitur," and a drawing of our crypt beneath Santa Croce. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "The voice of the dead speaks beneath the earth. An admirable opening for blackmail or blasphemy. Which, signor, do you suspect?" "Neither, I fear. The night after its arrival, the custodian of that crypt was found dead. No wound, no mark, only a look of terror so profound the coroner called it an apoplexy. But the note had vanished from his desk. The locks showed no sign of force. Holmes's fingers drummed once, 3 beats and a halt, mirroring the earlier knock. And you bring this to me rather than to the Florentine police because the second letter arrived yesterday, addressed to me." Rossi's voice caught. "It claims that a third will come, and when it does, the dead will rise. I have traveled across Europe to place it in your hands before that prophecy is fulfilled." Holmes's eyes half closed, a smile ghosting his lips. "The resurrection business has always been perilous for curators. May I see the document?" He accepted the parchment with delicate fingertips. The Latin lines were etched in faded ink, yet beneath them a faint dusting of white powder clung to the fibers. He lifted the page toward the lamplight. "You observed this residue?" "I thought it marble dust from the catacomb floors." "Marble?" "No, this is bone ash." The words dropped into the silence like stones into water. Rossi blanched. I felt a chill that no fire could dislodge. Holmes turned to me. "Watson, note how the grains adhere only where the ink fails," suggesting the writing instrument was dipped not in fluid, but in a suspension. Whoever composed this desired not merely to write a warning, but to consecrate it. He folded the sheet precisely. "Our ghost, then, is a chemist or a priest. Possibly both." The knock came again, softer, almost human in its rhythm. I glanced toward the pane. No one stood beyond the fog. Holmes rose and, with that unhurried grace which always preceded his most astonishing deductions, extinguished the lamp. "Observe, Watson. He, or it, has not gone." The faint outline of a hand pressed briefly against the glass, leaving a smear of pale dust. When the lamplight flared once more, the handprint was gone. "Your visitor from Florence brings the dead indeed," Holmes said quietly. But before we chase phantoms, let us confirm whether this dust glows under heat. He moved toward the fire with the folded parchment. Rosie reached out instinctively. "Signor Holmes, please, if that letter burns—" "It will not burn," Holmes assured him, holding it close to the flame until the ash shimmered with dull phosphorescence. "Calcium phosphate, Watson." Bone turned to memory. He laid it flat again, his expression unreadable. "The question is, whose memory seeks release beneath Santa Croce?" Rosie shivered. "Then you will come to Florence?" Holmes listened to the fading echo of the tap outside, now replaced by the steady ticking of the mantel clock. "The train leaves Dover for the continent at dawn. Pack your revolver and your patience, my dear Watson. We go where the dead speak Latin." The clock struck once, and in that single note the rhythm of the night seemed to settle, an unearthly cadence promising revelation. Holmes's hand was still poised above the parchment as the clock's single chime faded into silence. The phosphorescent trace along the inked Latin letters seemed to dim with the sound itself, as though the dust obeyed that solemn rhythm. "You see, Watson," he murmured, "even matter responds to time's cadence. The dead are punctual, if nothing else." Rossi, visibly shaken, clutched the arms of his chair. I leaned closer. "You think the letter was composed in a crypt?" Holmes nodded fractionally. "The reaction requires phosphoric remains and humidity, conditions easily found beneath a Florentine church. Whoever wrote this has knowledge both of chemistry and ritual. Not a madman's work, but that of a mind wishing to merge science with sacrament." He straightened, the faint gleam of excitement sharpening his tone. "Pack lightly. Rossi, the continent awaits." The tap-tap came again, this time from the fireplace vent. Holmes's gaze snapped toward it. I seized the poker and pulled open the grate. A folded scrap of parchment slid forward amid the soot. He caught it deftly before it touched the hearth. "Our visitor is efficient," he said. "Already the second message, delivered without entry." Rossi whispered, "It said the third would bring the dead." "Then this is the second," Holmes finished. He unrolled the grimy paper. The same phrase appeared, written with hurried strokes. "The voice of the dead is near. Seek the ash where the heart once beat." Beneath it, a crude outline of a human chest with a mark over the sternum. Holmes studied it for only a breath. "Note the pattern of dust, Watson. This was drawn upon a stone surface. The grains embedded at the edges reveal it was pressed from below, not written upon." "You mean—" "I mean it was prepared inside a tomb and pushed outward through a vent or fissure. Someone very much alive remains beneath Santa Croce." The words sent a shiver through me that no London fog could equal. Within the hour, we had our passage booked for the morning express to Dover. Rossi, exhausted, fell into uneasy sleep on the settee while Holmes sat motionless by the dying fire, eyes fixed upon the ash pattern where the second message had emerged. "Observe the symmetry, Watson," he said softly. "Two knocks, two notes, both in ash. The rhythm will repeat once more, always three. Our adversary obeys his own liturgy. I heard again that phantom cadence in the street below, 3 slow hoofbeats, then silence. By dawn the fog thinned to a silver veil. Holmes declined breakfast entirely, limiting himself to coffee so black it seemed a potion. A man who plays with dust, Watson, must be followed swiftly lest he vanish into it. Rossi accompanied us to Victoria Station, his nervous fingers clutching the leather case that held the cursed letters. As we took our seats, Holmes leaned close. "Do not look back through the window, my dear fellow. We are watched." I resisted the urge, though I caught the flicker of movement in the corner of the glass, a gloved hand lowering as the whistle shrieked. The train lurched forward, that recurring tap-tap now echoed through the rhythm of the wheels against the rail. Holmes sat opposite me, eyes half closed, lips moving silently as if counting the beats. 14 to the mile, he said suddenly. At this pace, Our rhythm becomes a code. Remember it. Holmes, do you truly believe someone followed us from Florence? I believe belief itself is the method, Watson. Our phantom cultivates it. He knows that fear creates patterns where none exist, yet even illusions leave footprints. The day stretched long through France, the carriages clattering like a metronome of suspense. At Calais, Holmes disappeared into the customs office for half an hour and returned with dust upon his cuffs. The letters contain residue identical to that found upon a crate bound for Italy, he explained, addressed to the Archivio Mediceo and signed by a Reverend Paolo Ventresca. Rossi started. Ventresca, he was the chaplain of Santa Croce until last month, dismissed after an incident with the relics. Holmes inclined his head. Indeed? Then our ghost may yet wear a collar. By evening we arrived in Florence under a bruised sky. The bells of Santa Maria del Fiore tolled 8, their echo mingling with the tap-tap of carriage wheels upon stone, a motif that had followed us across borders. Holmes absorbed it with a faint smile. The city itself continues our rhythm. Excellent. Rossi led us through narrow alleys to his lodging near the Piazza della Signoria. The air carried that mineral tang of limestone dust. Within, he unfolded a map of the crypt. Here, he pointed, beneath the chapel of the Medici tombs. The old custodian was found by this alcove. Holmes traced the route with his finger. 3 chambers in succession, 1 entrance, no ventilation save a single shaft, our probable conduit for the second message. He looked up. We will descend tonight. Tonight, I protested. Surely the authorities would prefer daylight and ceremony. We require secrecy and shadow. Bring your revolver. Rossi will provide lamps. An hour later, beneath flickering lantern light, we stepped down the spiral of worn stone. The air grew dense, infused with the dry sweetness of dust long undisturbed. The sound returned, faint but unmistakable. Tap, pause, tap, tap, as if something within the wall acknowledged our arrival. Rossi gripped my sleeve. Holmes raised his lamp. Note the echo, Watson. Not metal against stone, but bone. The beam caught a cluster of fine powder drifting from a fissure. Holmes crouched, touched a gloved fingertip to it, and brought it to his lips. Calcium again, and carbon. Recent combustion. Someone heated bone here within the last day. Rossi gasped. But the crypt has been sealed since the custodian's death. Holmes said nothing. His eyes, keen and reflective, followed the fissure upward to where it met the shaft. He gestured toward it. There lies our postbox of the dead. With surgical precision, he inserted his walking stick and prized loose a fragment of paper. The 3rd letter, Watson, delivered precisely on schedule. The fragment bore a single line, scrawled in haste. He walks again. For a moment, none of us breathed. Then, from somewhere beyond the alcove, came the low scrape of stone upon stone, as though a lid shifted upon an unseen sarcophagus. The sound traveled through the crypt like the pulse of the earth itself, steady, rhythmic. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Holmes lowered his lamp, his voice scarcely above a whisper. Gentlemen, the 3rd knock has begun. The air in the crypt vibrated faintly with that subterranean rhythm, the soft tap, pause, tap, tap, echoing from stone to stone until it seemed the vault itself possessed a pulse. Holmes motioned for silence and moved forward, lantern raised just high enough to cast trembling halos on the carved sarcophagi lining the chamber. Rossi's breathing rasped behind me. Stay close, Holmes whispered. Whatever moves here depends upon our fear to finish its sentence. The scraping resumed, slower now, deliberate. Holmes crouched beside a marble lid and ran his fingers along the seam. Observe this dust, Watson, displaced only along one edge. Our intruder opens from within. I felt a cold tightening in my chest. You mean someone alive? Alive, or convincingly so? Help me shift it. Together we heaved until the slab slid half an inch, and a sigh of stale air escaped, bearing the unmistakable scent of recent smoke. Holmes lowered his lamp. Within lay not bones, but a shallow cavity lined with cloth and instruments, a glass retort, a small brazier, and the residue of burnt material that gleamed whitely under the flame. Rossi trembled. "Those are from the custodian's store. I saw them in his workshop." Holmes examined the residue with his magnifier. Calcium phosphate again, fused with mercury. A dangerous combination, one that, when heated, yields a luminous vapor. Our ghost was no supernatural visitor, Watson, but a man experimenting with phosphorus and bone dust. His purpose? To create the illusion of life emerging from death. The scraping ceased as abruptly as it had begun. From the opposite wall, a whisper rose, a faint susurration, human breath forced through a crack. Holmes turned sharply toward it. "Rossi, hold the lamp steady." The light trembled across a row of effigies until it caught upon a smaller slab near the rear, newly cemented. A faint puff of grey powder clung to the edges. Holmes pressed his ear to it, listening. "There," he murmured. "Hear the echo. Not hollow, resonant. Someone sealed this chamber less than a day ago." Before I could speak, his thin blade flashed, prying the mortar free. The slab shifted outward with a groan, revealing a narrow passage and, at its base, a prone figure wrapped in a monk's robe. Rossi gasped, "Signor Ventresca!" The man's eyelids fluttered at the sound. Holmes knelt swiftly, cutting the bindings around his wrists. "Still warm," he noted, "and breathing shallowly, the ghost of Florence, exorcised by fatigue rather than faith." Ventresca's lips moved. A hoarse whisper escaped. "The ash must rest." The voice silenced. Holmes leaned close. "You will find speaking easier, Reverend, if you first accept that you are no longer beneath the earth by divine appointment, but by design of your own folly." The priest's eyes opened, wild with terror. "I did not kill him. The custodian. He found the experiments. I sought only to preserve the sacred relics, to give them light again. He tried to destroy the formula." His voice broke. "The dust, the bone, it spoke when fire touched it. I heard them." Holmes's tone was crisp. "You heard chemical reaction, not revelation, and when your accomplice threatened exposure, you made him part of the demonstration." Ventresca shook his head weakly. "No." He inhaled the vapor. His heart stopped. I fled. The letters were warning, not threat. Holmes regarded him a long moment. "Then who placed the second and third? You were already buried here when they appeared." The priest's mouth worked soundlessly before he whispered, "Another." He called himself Il Custode delle Ossa, the keeper of bones. He said the experiment was incomplete without the third awakening. Rossi crossed himself. "That name is known in Florence's darker tales, a grave robber from decades past." Holmes's eyes brightened with grim satisfaction. "Then our living ghost has inherited both legend and laboratory. Watson, assist me. We must move this man out before our keeper decides to claim his creation." As we half-dragged Ventresca toward the stairs, the tap-tap returned, now echoing from above, rhythmic as a Morse signal. Holmes halted, lantern high. "Listen, that is not random. It spells mori, Latin imperative. Die." He glanced upward toward the shaft. "Our adversary communicates in the same tongue as his victims. Efficient." We reached the first landing when a sudden rush of air extinguished our light. Rossi cried out. I struck a match, revealing only drifting dust and the faint phosphorescent shimmer upon the walls. Holmes seized my arm. "He sealed the exit." Indeed, the upper gate now bore a fresh smear of mortar. The tap-tap intensified overhead, each blow sending down flecks of powder. Holmes examined the hinges by touch. He works fast, but not fast enough. Producing a small phial from his coat, he poured a few drops along the seam. Acrid smoke hissed, eating through the soft lime. Nitric solution, useful when superstition proves adhesive. The barrier gave way with a dull crack. Cool air swept down the stair, carrying the chime of distant bells above. Midnight striking across the city. Rossi stumbled into the open, gasping. Holmes paused at the threshold, eyes narrowing toward the dark nave beyond. He's near. The rhythm has changed. Listen. We stood still, the three of us, as faint footfalls circled the chapel. Tap, pause, tap, tap. A human cadence retreating toward the cloister. Holmes drew his revolver and motioned silently. "We pursue until the beat falters," he whispered. Out in the cloister, the moonlight fractured through lattice stone, painting the courtyard in bars of silver and shadow. The figure ahead moved between them, a tall man cloaked in black, head uncovered, carrying what seemed a bundle of cloth. Holmes's voice rang out, clear and cutting. "The keeper of bones, I presume. Drop your burden, and the masquerade ends here." The man turned, revealing a mask fashioned from a skull's upper half. His laughter was low and hollow. "You disturb the covenant, Englishman. The dead are restless because you deny their voice." Holmes advanced steadily, pistol level. "I deny only theatrics when they masquerade as theology. What you call a covenant is merely chemistry abused." The figure's reply came as a hiss. "Then listen to their proof." He flung the bundle toward the stones. It burst open, releasing a cloud of gray ash that shimmered phosphorescent under the moon. Rossi shrieked. The scent of burnt calcium filled the air. Holmes lunged forward, sweeping his coat across his mouth. "Cover your face, Watson. The vapor is volatile." The skull-masked man vanished into the colonnade, his footsteps pounding out the familiar pattern as the dust swirled luminous around us. Tap, pause, tap, tap, echoing in the hollow of my ribs like a second heartbeat. Holmes straightened, eyes aflame with the thrill of pursuit. "He plays his rhythm still, Watson. Let us see how long before it turns to his requiem." Holmes was already in motion before the last swirl of ash had settled, the rhythm of his steps matching the fugitive's pattern. Tap, pause, tap, tap, so precisely that the sound seemed doubled, a duet of hunter and hunted. "Watson, left flank," he called softly. "He'll veer toward the sacristy to avoid the guard's patrol. Cut him off by the cloister arch." I sprinted beneath the stone arcade, revolver drawn, lungs burning with the acrid tang of the phosphorescent vapor that still glimmered faintly on our clothes. The moonlight caught on the wet flagstones, throwing our shadows long and spectral. Ahead, the masked figure glanced back once. The skull gleamed white, then vanished into the darker recesses of the chapel corridor. Holmes's voice reached me, low and calm. "Observe, Watson. The rhythm falters when he turns corners. He counts his own steps. That vanity will betray him." A door slammed. The echo rolled like a drum beat. We burst through into the sacristy, its shelves stacked with gilt chalices and vestments heavy with dust. A narrow spiral stair led upward to the organ loft. Holmes gestured silently and began to climb, each step measured. The tap-tap resumed above us, though slower now, as though the man were burdened. At the landing, the air quivered with faint notes from the pipes, breaths rather than music, ghostly vibrations stirred by movement. Holmes advanced between the ranks of the organ until the fugitive stood revealed near the open window, his cloak torn, the skull mask askew to show a bearded face streaked with ash. Holmes spoke with quiet authority. "You are not the keeper of bones, sir. You are Enrico de Luca, assistant to the late custodian. Your fascination with resurrection led to his death and to this elaborate charade." The man's chest heaved. "I am what they made me, the keeper of what they cast aside. The priest's formula was mine. He stole it to glorify saints while I meant to restore men. By suffocating them in phosphorus fumes." Holmes's tone was acid. "Your victims were subjects of vanity, not salvation." DeLuca's hand trembled around a small glass phial. He took the last compound. Without it, the cycle fails. I needed only the final sample from the Englishman's hands. Holmes's eyes flicked toward me for a heartbeat. He means the letter, Watson. Do not oblige him. Rossi, who had followed close behind, stepped forward despite Holmes's warning. Enrico, you betrayed Florence. You turned the tombs of our fathers into a furnace. The man laughed, a sound dry as bone. And yet they live through me. Look! He hurled the phial downward. It shattered against the stone, releasing a searing white flare that blazed like lightning. Instinctively, I shielded my eyes. When the glare subsided, smoke coiled through the rafters, and DeLuca was gone. Holmes was already at the window, scanning the courtyard below. He leaps 2 stories into a graveyard and lands running, he muttered. Madness wedded to calculation, a rare union. He turned abruptly. Watson, fetch Rossi. We give chase by the southern gate. We descended at speed, emerging into the cloister where moonlight had faded to a wan, pre-dawn grey. The bells of Santa Croce tolled once, a lonely sound that mingled with the steady rhythm ahead of us. Holmes paused to listen, head tilted. Hear it, Watson? The beats changed again. Closer intervals. He's tiring. Through narrow streets we followed that spectral drumming until it merged with the hollow clang of distant foundry hammers along the Arno. The city stirred, unaware of the hunt threading its veins. At a crumbling bridge, DeLuca stumbled, clutching his chest. Holmes closed in, revolver steady. Enough, he commanded. End this illusion before it ends you. The man turned, face ghastly pale. You think this illusion mine alone? The church, the collectors, they begged for miracles while despising the means. I merely supplied faith its mechanism. Holmes approached slowly. A rationalist disguising himself as a mystic to deceive mystics. That is your tragedy. But even deceit leaves pattern. Allow me to expose yours. He gestured to the riverbank where the fugitive's footprints glowed faintly in the phosphorescent dust still clinging to his boots. See, Watson, the same residue as upon the letters. He carried bone ash in every step, marking his path like a liturgy of guilt. DeLuca gave a broken laugh. You trace the dead through their own dust. How fitting for a man who worships reason. I worship only precision, Holmes replied. And it tells me that the compound you inhale has poisoned your lungs. You have minutes at most. Yield, and I will spare you needless suffering. For a moment, defiance warred with despair on the man's face. Then, with sudden resolve, he turned and hurled himself toward the river's edge. Holmes fired once. The shot ricocheted from stone. DeLuca vanished into the dark current, leaving only a faint shimmer upon the water where the phosphorus met the tide. Rossi collapsed against the parapet, trembling. Is it over? Holmes watched the river flow, his profile etched against the paling sky. Over? No, the rhythm continues, merely transferred from pulse to echo. The question is who first taught him the cadence. What do you mean? I asked. He turned sharply. Ventresca spoke of another, an instigator, perhaps one within the Medici archives. DeLuca was only the implement. Observe how each letter arrived precisely timed with the moon's cycle. There is intellect guiding this symphony of dust. Rossi stared at him. Then the ghost remains. Holmes's mouth curved in a grim smile. Every mind haunted by knowledge beyond its grasp is its own ghost. He straightened, brushing the ash from his coat. We return to the crypt by daylight. There lies the composer of this requiem. As we walked back through the awakening streets, the city's noises swelled, a chorus of wheels, hoofbeats, and distant bells. Yet through it all, the faint tap, pause, tap-tap persisted, no longer from a single source, but scattered through the waking world, as though the rhythm itself had become Florence's heartbeat. Holmes listened, eyes narrowed. Do you hear, Watson? He said softly. The living now play the dead man's tune. When imitation spreads, truth hides beneath its echo. Our work begins anew. And from somewhere behind us, perhaps the river's stones, perhaps the wind, came that final whisper of the motif, insistent and hollow, summoning us back to the tomb that had first breathed. Holmes did not slow his pace as we neared Santa Croce again. The rising sun struck the marble facade in pallid gold, but his eyes were fixed inward, as if reading invisible symbols upon the air. "Rossi," he said quietly, "you mentioned a ledger the custodian kept, records of relics transferred or restored. Where is it now?" "In the curator's office, beneath the chapel. It was sealed after his death." "Then break the seal," Holmes replied. "The living may deceive, but paper seldom lies." We descended once more into the cool corridors beneath the church. The echo of our steps returned the now familiar tap. Pause, tap, tap, a haunting rhythm that seemed to answer its own memory. Rossi unlocked a narrow door. Within lay a desk, shelves, and the smell of ink and mildew. The ledger sat open as though waiting for us. Holmes brushed away a film of grey dust with his sleeve. "Observe the handwriting, Watson. Elegant, methodical. But here, see how the script changes mid-line." He traced a sentence with his finger. The custodian's record ends, and another hand continues the entry seamlessly. "That of Enrico De Luca, I suspect. Yet note the date, 2 days after the custodian's death." Rossi stared. "Impossible. The police confirmed only what they were meant to confirm," Holmes interrupted. "Our murderer needed to perpetuate the illusion that his victim lived long enough to send the first letter. Thus the handwriting forgery. But this later entry, item transferred to the Archivio Mediceo under special request of the prior. That phrase conceals our greater puppeteer." I leaned over his shoulder. "You believe someone in the clergy directed De Luca?" "Precisely. The prior's identity must be verified." "Rossi, who occupied that office?" Rossi hesitated. "That would be Monsignor Bellini, an esteemed scholar, recently attached to the Vatican's Department of Relics. He departed for Rome immediately after the funeral." Holmes closed the ledger with a decisive snap. "A convenient pilgrimage. We shall see if the road to sainthood is paved with bone ash." The faintest vibration trembled through the floorboards then. 3 dull knocks, each separated by a breath. Holmes raised a hand for silence. The sound came from beneath the desk. Without hesitation, he drew his knife and pried up a loose tile. Beneath it lay a small metal box. Inside, wrapped in parchment, rested a half-burnt candle fused with white residue. "Phosphorus again," he said, "but see, embedded within the wax, fragments of human bone." This was no mere illumination. It was a ritual of communication. The voice of the dead, a literal device to create sound through chemical heat. The wax burns, releases gas, forces air through a hollow bone, and produces that uncanny knocking, ingenious and monstrous in equal measure. Rossi's face blanched. "Then the ghost's rhythm was engineered," Holmes finished. "The illusion complete enough to convince any witness that the tomb itself spoke." He pocketed the object carefully. "The true author of this invention is the mind that sought to use it, the prior." We made our way up the stair toward the nave. Holmes's thoughts moved faster than his stride. "A man of science cloaked in sanctity," he murmured. "Bellini required both accomplices, Ventresca for theological sanction, De Luca for mechanical skill. When the experiment claimed a life, both became liabilities. One buried, one drowned." I asked. "And the letters?" "A smokescreen of penance. Bellini intended to distance himself while drawing attention to divine mystery. If belief spread, the Vatican would bless what began as crime." As we emerged into the chapel, sunlight filtered through colored glass, painting the marble floor with fragments of crimson and blue. Yet Holmes's gaze fixed upon the altar. "The rhythm persists," he said suddenly. I strained my ears. From somewhere within the wall behind the altar came a faint, hollow beat. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Rossi backed away in horror. No mechanism could remain. Holmes moved swiftly, pulling aside the embroidered cloth and striking the stone panels with his cane until one gave a muted response. He pressed the edge, and a concealed door opened with a sigh of stale air. A narrow stair descended into a chamber lit by flickering gaslight. At its center stood Monsignor Bellini. His clerical robes were dusted gray, his hands encased in gloves that shimmered faintly with phosphorescent powder. He smiled as though greeting old friends. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "you arrive at the final liturgy." Holmes's tone was iron. "So the prior returns to his relics. You buried the priest, murdered your chemist, and turned death into doctrine." Bellini inclined his head. "You mistake purpose for sin. The church is waning, Mr. Holmes. Miracles rekindle faith. I merely lent them form." "By forging resurrection with poison gas," Holmes countered. "Faith and science are both children of wonder," Bellini said softly. "Would you not awaken belief in men's hearts, even through terror?" "The only thing you awakened was madness," Holmes replied, "and now it sleeps no more." He advanced, revolver drawn. Bellini reached behind the altar and pressed a hidden lever. Instantly, vents along the ceiling exhaled a pale mist that glowed faintly in the gaslight. The rhythmic knocking began again, louder, resonating through the chamber like a giant heartbeat. Rossi clutched his throat. "Phosphine gas," Holmes muttered, wrapping his scarf over his mouth. "Watson, douse the lamps. The compound ignites with heat." We plunged into darkness. Only the glowing mist remained, soft, spectral, alive. Bellini's voice drifted through it. "You cannot silence the dead, Mr. Holmes. They speak because men long to hear them." Holmes's silhouette moved beside me. "On the contrary, Monsignor, they speak because you built them a stage." He raised his revolver, fired once toward the lever's spark chamber. The bullet shattered the valve, releasing a hiss like a dying breath. The rhythmic knocking faltered, staggered, and stopped. When the smoke cleared, Bellini lay collapsed by the altar, his hands still gripping the broken lever. The phosphorescent residue glowed faintly upon his gloves, then dimmed. Holmes stood over him, face unreadable. "He sought immortality and found it in chemistry," he said. "A pity genius should stoop to deception when truth itself holds wonders enough." Outside, the bells began their morning toll. The sound merged with the fading echo of the last knock, a solemn cadence that hung in the air like a benediction for the lost. Holmes turned to me. "Come, Watson. There is still a confession to record before the day grows honest." As we stepped into the nave, the light struck the lingering dust, and for an instant it shimmered again. Tap, pause, tap, tap, as though Florence itself remembered the rhythm of the dead. Holmes moved through the nave without pausing, his stride brisk and deliberate, as though the faint shimmer of dust still hanging in the air might reanimate if given attention. Rossi followed behind us, white as a marble, one hand trembling over his heart. "He is dead," he whispered. Holmes glanced back once. The compound that sustained his illusion consumed him the instant he lost control of it. The rhythm ends where its composer falls. Then, with characteristic precision, he added, "Yet every end conceals a coda, Rossi. The confession must be read before silence closes its lips." We crossed into the adjoining vestry, where the air tasted of wax and cold metal. Holmes motioned me to secure the door while he examined Bellini's pockets. From one he withdrew a folded sheaf of parchment. "Watson, observe the seal, Vatican registry. This is no local sermon." He unfolded the papers upon the table. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, its Latin precise. Holmes read aloud, "Experimentum resurrectio, animae per martyrium." The Experiment of Resurrection of the Soul Through Matter, Bellini's Manifesto. His voice steadied into translation. To restore faith, one must restore the illusion of divine proof. If dust may speak, the devout will listen, and belief will once more govern the hearts of men. Rossi muttered a prayer under his breath. Holmes continued, materials, bone ash of the sainted, mercury salts, phosphorus, process, ignition to evoke glow, percussion to mimic the divine pulse. He stopped, tapping the margin where an annotation appeared. Formula secured from British correspondence, source to remain unnamed. I frowned. British correspondence. Then the genesis of this horror lies not in Florence? Holmes's eyes gleamed. Precisely. We are drawn once again into our own shadow. Note the script's addendum. London, December. Received via chemist H. There is only one chemist of sufficient repute and daring to traffic in such materials. You mean Professor Henry Blackwell, Holmes said grimly. Once dismissed from University College for experimenting with organic phosphors. I testified at his inquiry. It seems his vanity has survived exile and found a congregation. Rossi grasped the edge of the table. Then all this, Bellini, De Luca, the custodian's death. It was born from a London experiment. Holmes inclined his head. And exported beneath the guise of relic restoration. The priest sought holiness in chemistry. Blackwell sought profit in faith. A perfect symbiosis of sin. He gathered the papers, his movements precise, but his face somber. Watson, I have seen crimes of greed, of passion, of madness, but rarely of persuasion. This man believed himself a savior by deceit. That is the most dangerous conviction of all. Rossi sank onto the bench. What will become of our church, of Florence? The people will not understand. They will, Holmes replied softly. When reason is restored, faith may yet survive. But the story must be told without miracle. At that moment, a faint tapping echoed from beyond the vestry door. Slow, deliberate, tap, pause, tap, tap. Rossi stiffened, eyes wide. Holmes froze, head tilted. Not echo, he whispered. Footsteps. He motioned me to extinguish the lantern, and in the gloom we heard the sound repeat. Closer, upon the marble outside. Holmes drew his revolver and eased the door open. A figure stood framed in the half-light of dawn, a man in a porter's coat, cap pulled low. He carried a satchel bound with cord. Holmes stepped forward. You come early for confession, my friend. The man flinched. Signor Rossi sent for me to collect the prior's effects. Indeed, Holmes said evenly. And how did you know the prior was dead? The porter hesitated, eyes darting. All Florence knows by now. Holmes advanced, voice hardening. Then you came too soon for gossip and too late for service. Open the satchel. The man backed away, clutching the strap. I moved to intercept. He lunged, striking the table. The parchment scattered. Holmes fired once, into the ceiling. The echo froze him where he stood. Rossi snatched the bag and spilled its contents across the floor. Vials, folded letters, and a thick envelope bearing the crest of the British Royal Chemical Society. Holmes stooped to retrieve it. Our link to London, neatly couriered back to its sender. He broke the seal. Inside were drafts of correspondence between Bellini and Blackwell. Payments, formulas, and one chilling line. Shipment of saintly dust received. Commence demonstration in crypt. Holmes's jaw tightened. The trail leads home, Watson. Bellini's death is but the second act. He turned to the trembling courier. You will deliver a message instead. Tell Professor Blackwell that Sherlock Holmes accepts his invitation to resurrection. The man swallowed. I only carry parcels. Then carry truth for once, Holmes said sharply. Go. When he had fled, Rossi looked between us in disbelief. You intend to follow him back to London? "There are crimes which cannot be confined by borders," Holmes replied, "and one mind behind them that understands too well how belief travels faster than reason. If this formula spreads, Europe will burn candles made of the dead in every church." He folded the manifesto, placing it within his coat. "Rossi, you will remain here. Tell the authorities the truth. No miracles, no ghosts, only men and their errors. The world must learn to mistrust its own marvels." Rossi bowed his head. "I owe you my life, Signor Holmes. May the saints forgive what men have done in their name." Holmes gave a rare, grave smile. "If forgiveness exists, it begins with comprehension. Farewell." We stepped once more into the open square. The bells of the morning mass began to ring, scattering pigeons into the brightening air. The sound merged with a distant carriage wheel striking the cobbles in that same persistent rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Holmes listened, his expression remote. "The motif endures, Watson," he murmured. "It has crossed the channel already, carried not by dust or bone but by curiosity itself. And curiosity, my friend, is the most combustible substance known to man." I followed his gaze eastward where the sunlight cut through the smoke and the city seemed to breathe again, quiet, expectant, haunted. The rhythm echoed faintly between the walls, leading us inexorably toward the next pursuit. The sound of the bells still clanged faintly in my ears when the train pulled away from the Florence platform. Holmes sat opposite me, eyes half closed, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin as the rhythmic tap, pause, tap, tap of the wheels echoed beneath our carriage. "An admirable accompaniment," he murmured. "Even the locomotive has joined our motif. Curiously apt, considering we chased the ghost of a man who believed machinery could simulate the divine." I watched him for several miles before daring to interrupt. "You think Professor Blackwell orchestrated this entire affair from London?" Holmes opened his eyes. "Not orchestrated. Licensed. Bellini sought an imprimatur, and Blackwell provided one. Each found in the other what his conscience lacked. Bellini's piety absolved Blackwell's ambition. Blackwell's science sanctified Bellini's deceit. A perfect transaction." He reached into his coat and drew forth the prior's manifesto. "But here lies the true marvel, Watson. Observe this watermark." He held the parchment to the light. Faint letters appeared across the fibers. "Crown Mill, Harrow." The same stationery used by the Royal Chemical Society for official correspondence. That means Blackwell possessed access long after his expulsion. He has an accomplice inside London's scientific establishment. I felt a tightening of apprehension. Then our work resumes the moment we reach Baker Street. "Precisely," said Holmes. "And if my deduction holds, the next demonstration will already be in preparation. The resurrection formula, as they styled it, was never intended to end in Florence. It was a prototype." The train's whistle shrieked, blending with the recurring rhythm of the wheels. Holmes's gaze grew distant. "Note the cadence, Watson. 4 beats to the revolution, identical spacing to our phantom's knock. Coincidence or conditioning? The mind, once attuned, perceives pattern everywhere. That is both the investigator's strength and his danger." I smiled faintly. "You sound almost haunted, Holmes." He returned the smile without warmth. "Haunted only by logic, my dear fellow, a far less forgiving spirit." The remainder of the journey passed in pensive silence. When at last we reached Victoria Station, dusk had settled over London like a curtain of soot. A fine mist clung to the cobblestones, reflecting the gaslight in dull halos. Holmes hailed a cab with a curt whistle, and soon we were rattling toward Baker Street. Inside our familiar sitting room, Mrs. Hudson had left the fire laid but unlit. Holmes struck a match, the flare momentarily illuminating the sheaf of Florentine documents upon his desk. "The confession of Bellini, the formula of Blackwell," he said, arranging them with surgical neatness. Now let us see how resurrection fares in the English climate. I poured us both a measure of brandy. Where shall we begin? With the post, he replied. He drew from the mantel a bundle of letters and flicked through them swiftly until one caught his eye, an envelope embossed with the Royal Chemical Society's seal. And the conductor strikes his cue, he murmured. Tearing it open, he scanned the contents. Invitation to a private demonstration at the Royal Academy Laboratory. Tomorrow evening, 8 o'clock. Professor Henry Blackwell requests the honor of your presence. He looked up. You see how our adversary anticipates us. The fool cannot resist an audience. Then it's a trap. Undoubtedly, said Holmes with satisfaction rather than fear. And we shall walk into it, eyes open. He spent the next hours analyzing every scrap of evidence from Florence. The phosphorescent residue was transferred into glass slides, the candles dissected, the ashes catalogued. I watched him work, the lamplight glinting from his instruments, his movements accompanied by that quiet tap-tap of his pipette upon the glass, a sound so precise it echoed the rhythm that haunted us from Italy. At length he spoke. Watson, consider this composition: calcium phosphate, phosphorus, and mercury. The reaction yields light and sound through combustion, but only when mixed with human carbon. You mean bone? Not merely bone, Holmes said. Organic residue, traces of the marrow, the element Bellini called the soul of matter. He needed Blackwell's expertise to refine it. He paused, eyes narrowing. The moral irony is exquisite. In attempting to prove divine presence through chemistry, they have demonstrated only human corruption through science. I felt a chill. Then Blackwell's next step would be to prove his formula before witnesses. Precisely, Holmes said. And if I am right, he intends to use a human subject, perhaps even a living one. He rose abruptly, crossing to the window. Outside, fog drifted through Baker Street, muffling the city's usual din. Yet beneath it I could hear a faint, rhythmic clatter from some distant workyard. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Holmes turned toward the sound as though it were a summons. It begins again, he said. The echo has followed us home. That night neither of us slept. Holmes spent the small hours composing a ciphered telegram to Inspector Lestrade and preparing a small valise of chemical reagents. Protection against our own experimenter, he explained. If he employs phosphine again, this will neutralize the gas. At dawn, he allowed himself a single cup of coffee. Watson, you once accused me of worshipping logic. Tonight you may see its altar. Do you expect danger? I asked. He smiled slightly. When one attends a resurrection, my dear fellow, one should never count on the safety of the grave. The day passed in heavy anticipation. At precisely 8 o'clock, we arrived at the Royal Academy Laboratory, a vast hall lined with glass retorts and copper coils. The audience consisted of 12 men in evening dress, among them several of London's most esteemed chemists. At the far end stood Blackwell himself, silver-haired, immaculate, his eyes shining with fervor. Mr. Holmes, he exclaimed, spreading his arms, how fitting that the great detective should witness my vindication. Holmes inclined his head. Vindication through exhumation, I presume. Through revelation, said Blackwell. You saw the Florentine experiment, a failure of faith. Mine will be perfect. He gestured toward a shrouded object upon a table. Behold the material vessel, the relic of Saint Agnes, restored to purity by my process. In 1 minute, she will speak again. Holmes's voice was low. You risk your soul for applause, Professor. Take care the voice you raise is not your own destruction. Blackwell smiled. Genius has always been mistaken for blasphemy. He struck a match. Let the faithful hear. The flame touched the crucible. Instantly, a glow pulsed through the glass. Tap, pause, tap, tap, as if something within knocked upon the walls of its confinement. The light brightened, the rhythm quickened, Tap, 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 until the sound filled the hall with the dreadful semblance of a heartbeat. Holmes's eyes narrowed. He has surpassed Bellini. The compound is alive. Then, with a sudden hiss, the glass burst. A cloud of luminous vapor billowed outward as the audience cried out. Through the swirling glow came the echo of that inhuman rhythm, louder than ever. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pounding like a summons from beyond. The glowing vapor swirled around us like a living fog, each pulse of its light synchronized with that dreadful rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, tap, as if the air itself possessed a heart. Holmes was already in motion, his movements swift and exact despite the chaos that erupted around us. "Cover your mouths," he shouted. "It's phosphine. The man's turned chemistry into necromancy." Men stumbled through the fumes, coughing and shouting. The laboratory lights flickered, catching the shimmer of the vapor until the whole hall seemed alive with spectral fire. Blackwell stood unmoving amid his creation, arms raised as though conducting an invisible choir. "Do you hear them, gentlemen?" he cried. "Matter sings. The very dust of saints answers the spark." Holmes seized a cloth, doused it in water from a basin, and threw it over the crucible. The reaction hissed like a serpent, the light faltering but not dying. I rushed to aid him, striking at the valves of the gas main. Holmes caught my arm. "No, it feeds from the inner retort. Cut the secondary line first, or we'll ignite the building." The noise was near unbearable, the rhythm hammering through the metal frames, through the floor, through my ribs. For an instant, the light dimmed, and in that dimness, a shadow moved within the cloud, vaguely human, yet fractured, shimmering like liquid glass. A shape formed, head bowed, arms extended, as though someone were rising from within the chemical storm. I felt my heart seize. "Holmes!" He did not look up. "A projection, Watson, residue shaped by vibration and light. Nothing supernatural, only optics." His tone remained steady, but I saw the tremor in his hand as he turned the final valve. With a sharp twist, the hiss ceased, and the flame's brightness collapsed inward upon itself, fading to a dull phosphorescent smear upon the floor. Blackwell stared at the dying glow with disbelief. "No, you cannot silence truth." "Truth does not require sound," Holmes said coldly. "Only reason." He approached, revolver drawn. "You have murdered faith by imitating its voice." The professor's expression hardened. "Murdered. I have resurrected. When men see light spring from decay, they will believe again." "Believe in you," Holmes corrected. "Not in God." Blackwell's lips curled. "And why should that distinction trouble you, detective? You live by revelation too. One of deduction, not divinity." Holmes's reply came low, almost weary. "Deduction begins in doubt, not worship." He gestured toward the shattered glass, and the men gasping behind us. "You have traded enlightenment for spectacle. Even a charlatan knows when his act has gone too far." "Never," Blackwell roared, snatching a vial from the bench. "If I must prove it through fire—" Holmes moved faster than thought. The vial flew wide, striking the iron railing. Sparks erupted as the liquid splashed across the floor, igniting into brief, blinding flame. I felt the heat lash my face. The rhythmic tap-tap roared into a continuous metallic pounding as the laboratory's pipes expanded under the sudden surge. "Watson, the extinguisher! Quickly!" I seized the canister and turned the lever. White vapor surged forth, blanketing the floor. The flames sputtered out, leaving only smoke and the acrid smell of burnt metal. Blackwell staggered backward, coughing violently. Holmes caught his wrist before he could reach another vial. "Enough theater, Professor. The curtain falls." The older man sagged, eyes watering. "You don't understand. The church, the crown, they'll claim it. You can't bury discovery." Holmes tightened his grip. Discovery buried itself when it forgot humility. The laboratory attendants had begun to recover. Lestrade burst through the doorway, his moustache glistening with condensation. "Good Lord, Holmes, what devil's work is this?" "Not the devil's," Holmes answered, "merely man's attempt to impersonate him." He handed Blackwell to the inspector. "Take care. The residue on his hands is highly reactive. One spark could turn repentance into explosion." Lestrade blinked at the professor's faintly glowing gloves. "I'll keep him in irons, sir. Iron doesn't burn easy." Holmes gave a short nod. "Seal the building, every retort, every flask. The formula must vanish from science before it devours what's left of faith." As the policeman moved about, I saw the professor's gaze fix on the smoldering crucible. His lips moved silently in rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Even in defeat, he clung to that pattern, like a man entranced by his own heartbeat. Holmes followed my eyes and spoke quietly. "There, Watson. See the tragedy of intellect divorced from conscience. The mind that mistakes rhythm for revelation will hear meaning in its own echo." He turned abruptly and crossed to the table where the fragments of parchment lay. "This," he said, collecting the scattered formula, "must never leave my custody." He slipped it into an envelope, sealing it with wax from the lamp. "Should posterity unearth it, let it be in ashes." The hall was nearly empty now. The vapor had thinned to mere mist, drifting upward to the broken skylight. Through it came the muted toll of St. Paul's bell, midnight, distant and solemn. The rhythm blended with it, 3 long peals, then a pause, then 2 short ones, echoing our cursed motif. Holmes looked up, listening as though the city itself were continuing the experiment. "Do you hear, Watson? Even London now repeats the cadence. It is remarkable how swiftly an illusion infects reality." "You mean the pattern will persist?" "In memory, yes," he said. "We are creatures of rhythm. Once heard, it plays itself within the mind. But the true danger lies not in what we hear, it lies in what we believe we've heard." He extinguished the final lamp, plunging the room into half-darkness. "Come, the dead have spoken enough tonight." We stepped into the corridor, the echo of our footsteps falling unconsciously into the same measured pattern. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Outside, the fog absorbed the sound, but I could still feel it pulsing beneath the pavement, as though London had acquired a second heartbeat. Holmes paused beside the cab, his face set against the lamplight. "Watson," he said softly, "there are moments when one almost envies faith, for it can sanctify even madness. Yet tonight we have seen what happens when the two exchange their masks." He climbed into the cab. The driver flicked the reins, and the wheels struck the cobbles in that now inevitable rhythm. Steady, human, eternal. Tap, pause, tap, tap. The cab wheels clattered down Baker Street, that persistent tap, pause, tap, tap following us like an unwanted echo. Holmes leaned back in silence, eyes closed, the lines about his mouth drawn tight. Only when we stopped before 221B did he stir, paying the driver with an absent gesture. "Watson," he said quietly, "what we witnessed tonight will not end with Blackwell's arrest. Ideas such as his are infectious. They spread more swiftly than contagion, and with deadlier consequence." Inside, the familiar warmth of our rooms seemed almost foreign. The faint smell of chemicals from our earlier experiments mingled with the city's damp fog. Holmes went directly to his desk and unlocked a small iron chest. From within, he drew out 3 envelopes. Bellini's manifesto, the correspondence from Florence, and Blackwell's formula. He arranged them with surgical precision, the lamplight glinting on the wax seals. "Observe the sequence, Watson," he murmured. "The conception of faith as chemistry, the method of its propagation, and the demonstration that nearly cost a dozen lives. Together they compose a single organism, belief mechanized." He touched each in turn. Bellini, the zealot; De Luca, the engineer; Blackwell, the scientist. 3 organs of one monstrous body. I sat opposite, still shaken by the night's events. But the organism is dead, Holmes. Surely this completes the matter. He regarded me with a thin smile. You forget. The contagion survives in memory. What man has seen, another will attempt. You heard him. The church, the crown, they will claim it. Such power tempts even virtue. He rose, pacing before the hearth. There is an irony here that even I cannot ignore. Bellini sought proof of the soul. Blackwell sought proof of genius. Both found only combustion. Yet somewhere between them lies a truth too dangerous to publish and too potent to destroy. I hesitated. You mean to keep the formula? I mean to bury it, he said. But one cannot bury thought, only delay its resurrection. He stopped abruptly, head turning toward the window. From the street below came the steady tread of a constable's boots. Tap, pause, tap, tap. The sound made him wince. Do you hear it, Watson? The motif pursues us still. It has passed from chemistry to consciousness. I fear it may yet find another vessel. A knock followed. 3 quick raps. I crossed to open the door. Lestrade entered, his coat still smelling of the laboratory smoke. Holmes, I thought you'd want the latest. Blackwell's in custody at Newgate, raving like a madman, but coherent enough to demand pen and ink. Holmes's eyes narrowed. To write what? A confession, or so he says. Keeps repeating that the rhythm must be completed. The warders hear him tapping all night on the cell wall. Same blasted pattern. Lestrade tapped it out on the table, unconsciously. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Holmes's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. Do not repeat it, Inspector. Lestrade blinked. Why in heaven's name not? Because repetition is remembrance, Holmes said softly, and remembrance is contagion. He released him, resuming his seat. Tell me, did he have access to any materials? None save pencil and paper, but he claims he needs no fire now. The fire's within the words themselves. Holmes exhaled sharply. He has learned the final stage, the transformation of illusion into language. The motif has become symbolic, mental. It will travel by ink rather than flame. Lestrade frowned. You speak as though the man were a disease. In a sense, he is, Holmes replied. A fever of intellect unrestrained by morality. Burn the manuscript the moment it is written. Do not read it, whatever the temptation. The inspector muttered something about detectives and devils and took his leave. When the door closed, Holmes remained motionless for several moments, his gaze fixed upon the sealed envelopes on the desk. It is curious, Watson, how swiftly the human mind converts terror into fascination. Already I feel the rhythm pressing upon my own thought. Even now I can trace its logic. 3 beats for creation, 1 pause for death. I stared at him. Holmes, you look ill. Let the matter rest. He smiled faintly. Rest is impossible when curiosity is awake. Then, more softly, do you suppose that was the true lesson, my friend? That faith, science, and reason are merely the same hunger in different disguises? I answered him honestly. Perhaps. But you, Holmes, you've never believed in ghosts. Until tonight I believed only in the ghosts of the living, he said. Now I suspect the dead may persist. Not in spirit, but in thought. He turned toward the hearth, dropped the 3 envelopes into the flames, and watched them curl and blacken. So ends the resurrection formula. The fire hissed once, releasing a faint tap. Pause, tap, tap, as air pockets burst within the burning wax. Holmes started slightly, then laughed, a low, weary sound. Even destruction imitates creation. The room fell quiet, save for the soft crackle of the fire. I poured him another brandy, which he accepted without a word. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its edge. Watson, promise me one thing. If ever my own pursuit of logic begins to mimic this rhythm, you will stop me, by persuasion or by force. You have my word, I said. He nodded. Good, For rhythm, like faith, must serve life, not command it. Outside, a sudden gust rattled the window panes. Somewhere in the distance, a hammer struck twice upon metal. Tap, pause, tap, tap, as though the city itself were repeating its secret to the night. Holmes glanced toward the sound, his expression unreadable. "Strange," he murmured. "London's heart beats faster than Florence's, yet the tempo is the same. Perhaps the contagion has already found its new choir." He drew the curtains closed, shutting out the fog and the echo together. "Tomorrow, Watson, we go to Newgate. If Blackwell's confession survives, we must ensure it never leaves his cell." The clock upon the mantel chimed once, then twice, the sound folding neatly into the rhythm that had followed us across a continent. Holmes sat back in his chair, the shadows deepening around his face. "It seems the dead have found a subtler voice," he said quietly. "Let us pray we are not yet fluent in its language." The fire spat once more, punctuating his words with that unearthly cadence. Tap, pause, tap, tap, as if echoing the heartbeat of something still waiting to be understood. The following morning found us at Newgate Prison beneath a sky the color of tarnished pewter. The air smelled of iron and wet stone, and even the guards spoke in hushed tones, as though sound itself were unwelcome near Professor Blackwell's cell. Holmes's step was measured, deliberate. "Remember, Watson," he murmured as we followed the turnkey. "The rhythm spreads through attention. If he taps, we must not answer." The corridor was narrow, lined with doors that bore small iron grates. From one of them came the faint tap. Pause, tap, tap. Soft, methodical, deliberate. I felt the hair rise at the back of my neck. "He's keeping time," I whispered. Holmes nodded grimly. "A dying man's metronome. He means us to hear it." The turnkey halted before the last cell. "He hasn't slept, sir. Writes through the night, won't eat. Keeps asking for you, Mr. Holmes." Holmes gestured for silence and stepped to the grate. Inside, Blackwell sat cross-legged on the floor, a sheaf of papers spread before him like the leaves of some dark scripture. His fingers moved lightly over the page, tracing each word as he murmured to himself. Holmes spoke softly. "Professor." The man looked up, eyes fever bright. "You came. I knew you would. The rhythm brought you." Holmes's voice was controlled. "It was reason, not rhythm, that brought me." "You've been writing?" Blackwell smiled faintly. "Not writing, transcribing. The formula is no longer mine. It writes itself. Listen." He tapped twice upon the floor. The faintest vibration answered from the stone wall as though the prison itself had learned his cadence. "Enough," Holmes said sharply. "You are poisoning sound with madness." "Madness?" Blackwell rose, his chains clinking. "No, Mr. Holmes. Illumination, the voice in matter continues. You destroyed the experiment, yet it endures in the air, in the pulse of London, in you." He pointed a trembling finger toward my companion. "You heard it too. Admit it." Holmes's expression did not change, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I heard only evidence of a diseased imagination. You mistake pattern for presence." Blackwell's smile widened. "Then why does your heart beat in measure with mine?" He began to tap again, and though Holmes remained motionless, I saw the faintest pulse at his temple answering the rhythm. Holmes broke the spell with a sudden command. "Guard, open this cell." The turnkey hesitated, but at his tone obeyed. The door creaked open, and Holmes strode inside. "You will give me the manuscript," he said. Blackwell clutched the papers to his chest. "You cannot silence revelation." Holmes's voice lowered. "Revelation implies divinity. Yours reeks of combustion." In a flash, he snatched the papers. The professor lunged, chains rattling, but Holmes stepped aside with surgical precision. "Watson," he called, "hold the lamp higher." I obeyed, and the light fell upon the topmost page. It bore a drawing, not of chemical apparatus, but of concentric circles filled with symbols, each marked by the rhythmic notation of 3 beats and 1 pause. Beneath it, in Latin, the phrase vox mortui per hominem loquitur. The voice of the dead speaks through man. Holmes studied it with grim fascination. He has abandoned chemistry altogether. The formula has become liturgy. Blackwell sank to his knees. You see? Even you comprehend its structure. Each mind that beholds it completes the cycle. Holmes tore the sheet in half. Then let me interrupt it. He handed the pieces to me. Burn them, Watson. As I moved to the lamp, Blackwell gave a strangled cry and lunged again. The chain caught him short, clanging against the stone. You fool, he shouted. It's within you now. The moment you name the pattern, you become its echo. Holmes ignored him, watching the pages curl and blacken in the flame. The faint smell of phosphorus rose, mingling with smoke. The rhythm ceased. For the first time since we'd entered, silence filled the cell. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the prison's masonry, came a single answering knock. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Holmes turned sharply toward the wall, eyes narrowing. No one else in this block? The guard stammered. All solitary, sir. No one near enough to... But the sound came again, unmistakable, as though the building itself responded. Holmes pressed his ear to the cold stone. Residual vibration, he murmured. The materials remember what they've endured. Yet his tone betrayed doubt. Blackwell laughed softly. It travels now through matter, through time. Even your silence will speak it. Holmes stepped back, the lamplight glinting in his eyes. You will die before the weekends, Professor, and when you do, the rhythm dies with you. Will it? Blackwell whispered. Or will it pass to the one who listens most intently? His gaze lingered on Holmes. Holmes signaled to the guards. Remove him. No visitors. No light. No metal. No rhythm. If he breathes, let it be in silence. As they dragged the man away, he began humming softly, the melody shaped by that infernal pattern. Tap, pause. Tap, tap. It faded down the corridor until it was indistinguishable from the pulse of the distant city. Holmes stood motionless, staring after him. Watson, he said at last, have you ever considered how sound imprints itself? The mind records it, the bones carry it, the walls echo it. Destroying it may be impossible. I touched his arm. You've faced contagions of thought before. This one will fade like the rest. He gave a short, mirthless laugh. I hope you're right. Yet even now, the echo persists. He tapped his finger against the lamp once, twice, then stopped abruptly, forcing his hand still. There, you see? The rhythm has insinuated itself into reflex. Holmes, I said quietly, you must rest. Rest, he repeated. Yes, before curiosity finds another beat. He gathered his coat, the tension in his movements betraying the unease he could not speak aloud. As we left the prison, the rain began to fall, soft, rhythmic, measured. Tap, pause, tap, tap. Each drop upon the carriage roof a ghostly continuation of that infernal code. Holmes stared through the window at the glistening street, his voice barely above a whisper. It seems even heaven repeats it now, Watson. The contagion ascends. The rain persisted all the way back to Baker Street, a muted percussion on the cab roof that mirrored the slow cadence of Holmes's thoughts. Neither of us spoke. When we entered our rooms, the fire had burned low, its embers pulsing with the same treacherous rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, tap, until Holmes struck it once with the poker, scattering the coals into silence. No ghosts, he murmured. Only persistence. He removed his coat and stood before the window, watching the rivulets streak down the glass. Watson, there are crimes which end with the culprit's capture, and there are others which end with comprehension. This one demands neither, yet burdens both. I settled opposite him, My notes spread upon my knee. Blackwell's experiment is finished. The formula destroyed. You saw to that. Ah, he said softly. But thought leaves residue more stubborn than phosphorus. It clings to the mind's corners, waiting for darkness to recall it. He looked down at his hands as if testing them for tremor. I have spent my life chasing patterns. Tonight I saw the danger of catching one too completely. I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing on us both. You fought not faith nor science, Holmes, but the corruption of both. If any conscience remains in England, that victory is yours. He smiled faintly, though the expression held no triumph. Victory is a word suited to battles, not contagions. Blackwell's rhythm will fade, yes. But into what silence? Every discovery hums faintly long after its music ceases. We are surrounded by invisible echoes of curiosity. He gestured toward the desk where the Florence papers had once lain, now reduced to ash. Destroying knowledge is simpler than forgetting it. For a while, we listened to the rain, its tempo blending with the faint crackle of the fire. Holmes spoke again, more quietly. There was a moment in that cell, Watson, when I pressed my ear to the stone, and I could have sworn the wall breathed. It is possible, is it not, that memory itself may linger within matter, that what we name the soul is nothing more than the universe remembering? I answered him carefully. If so, Holmes, then perhaps redemption lies in which memories we choose to leave behind. He regarded me for a long moment, then gave a small nod. A comforting thought, my friend. Let us hope it proves contagious in place of fear. He moved to his violin, the instrument resting where it always had, half shadowed, half waiting. There is only one antidote I know to the poison of rhythm, he said, to impose a better one. Lifting the bow, he drew from the strings a single sustained note, pure and level. It hung in the air like light-piercing fog. Gradually it shaped itself into slow, deliberate cadence, 4 measures, each precise, resolving not into tap, pause, tap, tap, but into balanced symmetry. Harmony replacing pulse. Life over imitation. As he played, the rhythm that had haunted us for days seemed to dissolve. The rain softened. Even the city's distant clamor receded until only that solitary violin spoke. I watched his face, the lines of fatigue easing, the cold intensity replaced by something almost human, peace or its closest twin. When the final note faded, he lowered the bow. There, he said, the contagion contained. I closed my notebook slowly. You have exorcised Florence, London, and perhaps yourself. He gave a brief laugh. Hardly myself, Watson. I'm too much a machine of inference to escape my own gears, but the mechanism can at least be tuned. Later, as he retired, I sat a while before the dwindling fire, recording my final entry. The events from Florence to Newgate had formed a pattern so intricate that I felt its beat still thrumming in my pulse. Yet as I wrote, Holmes's violin lingered in my ear, the sound not of despair, but of restoration. And it seemed to me that the true ghost in the crypt had never been a spirit at all, but the echo of human yearning, the eternal wish to make sense of the silence between heartbeats. When at last I laid down my pen, the rain had ceased. The city was still. Then, faintly, from the clock upon the mantel came 2 soft ticks, tap, pause, tap, tap, before settling into its ordinary measure. I smiled despite myself. Even in defeat, rhythm endures. Yet tonight it belonged to the living. Holmes's voice drifted from his chamber, half dream, half reason. Sleep, Watson. The dead are quiet now. And for the first time since Florence, I believed him.